So, talking about emotional intelligence, which is basically it's just about making good decisions when you're in a social situation or an emotionally charged situation. And what I want to focus on is why so often we don't make those good decisions, particularly at work. This is smart, capable people when everyone else around them can clearly see what the healthy thing is to do. They, for whatever reason, don't. Like you're in a meeting and you're talking to someone, right? You've probably been here and you're thinking to yourself, like, do you really need to be raising your voice right now? Or just let it go, right? Why are you harping on this? Or like, why didn't you just tell her you didn't want to do it? Or you are clearly you're just clearly not listening to anything anyone else has to say right now, right? And so the healthy thing here is presumably clear to everyone else, but they're not doing it. Why? And I'm going to start on kind of an unusual place on this, what are called psychological needs, which certainly we don't spend a lot of time thinking about, but they drive a striking amount of our behavior. So let me give you a few examples. And to do that, I'm going to be using a personality model called DiSC as I describe them. Think about someone you know who they're really direct, they're assertive, often forceful even, right? They've got a D or dominant style. These folks, they often have this really strong need for control and influence. So maybe that's you, maybe that's someone you know, probably someone in your social circle, right? It's this very strong psychological need. As well, they often have this deep-seated need to always be making progress, where they can even kind of get restless if they're not getting results. But then there's also needs that we don't necessarily always want to own up to. Even, we might not even know that they're there, but they can drive a lot of our behavior, even more so when we're not aware of them. So here, an example for this style would be a need to avoid weakness, certainly not to show any weakness. And it's not on the surface, but it drives a lot of that behavior and the choices that we make at times. All right, let's take a different style. Or influencing people. They're really outgoing, they're high energy, enthusiastic. What needs beneath the surface might be driving this type of behavior? Well, as you might guess, a really high need to connect with other people. And everybody's got these needs like this, right? But it's particularly pronounced here. There's also this really high need for novelty and play. And then also, though, and maybe a little less obvious, a really strong need to feel heard and appreciated, to have their thoughts and their emotions validated by someone else. So to get that need met, you get more talking, you get more expression, right? Maybe some karaoke. Down here, the S or steadiness style. This is my turf. What needs drive someone to be really accommodating and patient and gentle? Well, one of the big needs here is the need for harmony. And being accommodating really helps keep things harmonious, right? The need drives the behavior. There's also a really strong need to make people happy, and a particularly strong need for acceptance and belonging. Again, we all have that need, particularly strong here, though. And it's also really worth noting that for these folks, they have a lower need for that stuff across the circle, like control and influence. They're often willing to cede some of that control to make others happy or to keep things harmonious. Okay, and then there's the C or conscientiousness style. Those people, they're really analytical, reserved, precise. What underlying needs might drive someone to act like that? Well, one is this really strong need to be right? Being reserved, being self-contained, that helps you avoid making foolish mistakes. A really strong need for autonomy. And so if I'm an expert, if I put the effort into getting there, a lot of effort, right, I don't have to rely on anyone else. And perhaps a little deeper, a need to avoid blame. And so behaviorally, well, I'd often rather just sit things out than be the person who screwed things up. Or at the very least, I take tons of time analyzing the situation to make sure I don't screw up, running through all of those different scenarios in their heads, right? All those permutations, right? What if they ask this question? What if this topic comes up? What if someone aims their small talk at me? So what does this have to do with emotional intelligence? Making good choices in social or emotionally charged situations? Well, in a nutshell, we see people making bad choices when there's this misalignment between the healthy behavior that the situation requires and the person's psychological needs, right? Like, so imagine you've got a situation that calls for me to very patiently listen to someone, but I've got this really strong need for control and making quick progress. Or a situation that calls for me to go out and mingle and network, but I've got this really strong need to not make social mistakes. You see the disconnect there. But to make matters even trickier, these disconnects, they're usually taking place on this very primal level. They're tapping into these fears and these needs that are often well beyond our awareness. And so what we do is, well, we come up with all sorts of justifications for our behavior that oftentimes have nothing to do with why we actually acted that way. And so then, to the people around us, these reasons that you're given, right, they don't seem like particularly good explanations, because they're not. And so they wonder, well, what's the real explanation? And too often, that explanation they come up with is about our character, right? Well, they must be egotistical. They must be aloof. They must be socially incompetent. And sometimes, yes, our poor choices are about not knowing the healthy thing to do, or not caring, right? Not giving a crap. But probably more often, it's about being emotionally allergic to that healthy thing to do. Okay, so stepping back, the healthy thing to do. All right, I've said that quite a few times. What is the healthy thing to do? Well, one of the things that makes being a human being so incredibly complicated, why we call it emotional intelligence, is that it depends on the situation. Sometimes the healthy thing to do is expressing your anger, but sometimes it's keeping that anger in check. Sometimes the healthy thing to do is being generous and giving someone a second chance, but sometimes the healthy thing to do is being tough-minded and saying enough is enough. So this is a model of emotional intelligence called Agile EQ. It doesn't cover every single aspect of emotional intelligence. Things like you shouldn't poke strangers, or sir, we're going to need you to put your shirt back on. But it does capture most of the biggies. It describes 8 different ways to approach social and emotional situations that are appropriate at different times as we move through life. And so they're called mindsets. And I'll describe them super quick here. So there are times in life where you need to be able to get yourself into a self-assured mindset to really assert yourself. There are times you need to be able to get yourself into a dynamic mindset to get buy-in from people, persuade them, hold their attention. You need to sometimes take an outgoing mindset. Even if you're introverted, you've got to initiate and maintain relationships to be effective. Sometimes you need to think empathetically when people in your life need to be supported, when they need to feel seen, even at work, especially at work. You need sometimes to take on a receptive mindset. It's not always about me and my brilliant opinions. I have to truly listen. Then there are times where I need to show restraint, when things will get heated and every neuron in my body is telling me to act, or at least to roll my eyes so hard at someone that they do a 360, but I need to take on a composed mindset. Likewise, there are times where I need to step back and be objective, set aside my personal feelings on the topic, my personal relationships, and be really logical. And finally, there are times where I need to take on a resolute mindset, where we need to resist pressure, stand my ground, speak up about problems, even if it's going to make things uncomfortable or awkward, or you just know you're going to get one of those passive-aggressive, like, no, that's fine. That's fine, right? I'm not mad, right? A completely unrelated note, though. I think maybe it's time for you to stop using my Netflix password. But no, I'm not mad about this at all, right? And so we know examples are really helpful for this kind of thing. So let's zoom in on this last mindset, resolute. Why do people sometimes fail to act resolutely, even when it's clearly the right choice? Like, how many times have you seen someone not do this and you wanted to say to them, well, why didn't you just tell her no? Like, what were you thinking? Or, well, why didn't you speak up about these concerns earlier? Like, no one had any clue that you felt this way. Let me use myself as an example. All right, so this is where I fall on the DiSC model, squarely in the S region, accommodating, patient, right, the Hufflepuffs. So this weekend, door-to-door salesperson comes by, catches me outside, selling like pest control, and I probably get like 3 of these guys coming by a week, which actually I would probably pay someone to control the pest control people, but I have no interest or need for his services. But it took me 10 minutes to get him to stop pitching. 10 minutes of my time and 10 minutes of his, mostly my time, wasted because I was not resolute enough, because I was being too polite. Now, if it had been my wife right there, right, the conversation would have lasted exactly 15 seconds, right? In fact, I went inside afterwards and she and my daughter, they made fun of me for 5 minutes for not sending him away quicker, which is probably another conversation that I should have shut down more quickly, right? Why didn't I make the right choice? Well, it's because of these guys, psychological needs. And let's just focus on one, harmony here. In order to cut him off, because this guy, he did not pause at all, right? It was just one long sentence. In order to cut him off and firmly say, I am not buying, right? And back that up with the kind of firm, no nonsense nonverbals that my wife would have used. That's a clear lack of harmony. Resolute behavior inherently involves tension. It involves inviting friction into my life. But for me over here, deep in this psyche of mine, I am wired to be allergic to that. And so we've got this powerful psychological need, and it's pitted against the healthy behavior. Well, guess which one usually wins when we're going on autopilot, right? It's the psychological need. Now, we often don't admit why we acted that way, but that's what drove my emotionally unintelligent behavior, right? And so this is my effort meter here, how hard it is for me to move into that resolute mindset. It's not maxed out, but it's certainly in the really, really hard zone because of these needs here and because of how hard it's going to be to me to get those met here. Now, it's kind of a trivial example, but think about how often that resolute mindset is needed at work. You know, someone's, they're putting too much on your plate, asking you to do more than your fair share. Do you say no and make it weird? Or do you say, well, all right, I'll just do it, right? Maybe be resentful later on. Or you're in a meeting and there's a senior leader and they're promoting some idea that you don't agree with, but everyone else seems to be on board. Do you push back? And when that gets dismissed, do you push back again and then again? Or does someone like me obey that unconscious voice and say, hey man, why in the world would you deliberately invite tension into your world? Just get on the harmony path, bro, right? And that's the thing that makes being emotionally intelligent so difficult, is that the comfortable thing is sometimes the wrong thing, especially when it's subtle like this, when it's a judgment call. How much do I really disagree? Or, are they really putting too much on my plate? That rationalization machinery kicks in really quickly. We're built for that. And so most of the time, with all of these mindsets, when I avoid making the healthy choice, it's subtle. It doesn't devastate me. It doesn't devastate my relationship, but it adds up. And it adds up for the people around me. And I think that's a really useful way to think about maturity. Our willingness to do the difficult thing in the short term because it's the healthy thing in the long term. All right. So the point here is not for you to sympathize with me, although I will not turn that down. It is to illustrate why, for a particular person, it can be so very difficult to make the healthy choice in a given situation when to other people it's incredibly easy and obvious. And it's because of the role that those hidden needs play. So there's another video that I've done that you can check out on the actually really big question when it comes to emotional intelligence is, how do you help someone improve? How do you get someone like me to be really forthcoming with the problems that I'm seeing? Or how do you get that really passionate person to manage their tone? Or the really reserved person to actively reach out and make connections they need in the organization. So I'll talk through a study that we did with a little over 6,000 learners in different organizations on how we helped them do that. All right, so thank you so much for your time.